Shalom again. This is Rabbi Stuart Dowerman from Interfaithfulness. Let's talk about Boris, about Ivan and the rabbi. Once upon a time, there was a rabbi in the Russian Empire. There were many rabbis under the czars. And this rabbi, one Shabbat, was telling his congregation about a meeting he had in an inn with two Russian peasants, Gentiles, the kinds of people that his congregation would normally judiciously avoid because you never knew when things are going to go bad there in the Russian Pale. But still, the rabbi said, I met these two peasants and I learned something about God from them. And the congregation was shocked. You learned about God from two Russian peasants? What do you mean, Rabbi? And he said, well, as you know, I recently went to Kiev. And coming back, I had to stay one night in an inn. And at another table in the inn, there was these two peasants, Boris and Ivan. And Boris and Ivan were both quite drunk. Boris turned to Ivan and he said, Ivan, are you my friend? Ivan said, of course, Boris, I'm your friend. We've been friends since we were children. They go on, have another drink or so. Boris says to Ivan, well, if you're my friend, do you like me? Ivan says, of course I love you. Of course I like you, Boris. I'm your friend, and I wouldn't be your friend if I didn't like you. A few minutes later, Boris says to Ivan, okay, you're my friend, you say. You like me, you say. But do you love me? Ivan says, yes, I love you. I love you like a brother. Our wives are friends. Our children are friends. Yes, I love you. Boris says to him, well, do you know what causes me pain? Ivan says, well, no, not really. I don't know what causes you pain. And Boris says, then you don't love me. Ivan says, what do you mean I don't love you? He says, how can you say you love me if you don't know what causes me pain? That's an important question. It's an important question for our fellowships because we say that we love each other. We know that we're called to love each other. But do we know one another well enough to know what causes pain to the other people in our congregations? Or do we just have polite relationships where we nod and where we don't really find out about other people's lives until some great tragedy strikes or until they leave? We're supposed to have face-to-face relationships. That's what I believe in. That's why I'm teaching these things. That's where I'm going with my life at this time, establishing household spirituality, surrogate families as places where we develop our spirituality, because everybody wants to go where everybody knows your name. And in many of our congregations, we go there for years, and we may not know the names of everybody there. Now, I'm not trying to have a memory contest here, but it's an interesting question. So, Yeshua had a model for his families, for his congregations. It was modeled on the Mediterranean family. Today, we just want to look at, review that model a little bit and see if Paul agreed with Yeshua's model and perpetuated it in his own practice. So we're going to be looking at 5 characteristics of these congregations that Yeshua established, that Paul established. 5 characteristics, quickly. Here's the first one. Affective solidarity. That's a fancy word for loving relationship. When you read the letters of Paul, you find him often talking about how much he misses people, about how he heard that things were not well at their congregation, and he was really concerned, and he prayed a lot about it, and then he sent Timothy to find out about them, or he wants to know what's going on. He talks about himself as a father to them. He talks about them as having solicitude towards them like a mother would have for a child. This is very strong affective solidarity. And Yeshua said, by this shall all men know you are my disciples, if you have love for one another, demonstrable love. Another aspect of these fellowships was family unity. Yeshua talks a lot about unity. On the night before he was betrayed, you remember, he prays to the Father that we who believe in him should be one, even as he and the Father are one. That's a big statement. Unity is a big deal for him. And the Apostle Paul writes to the Ephesians and beseeches them to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So family unity is a second characteristic of the fellowships that Yeshua established, that Paul established, that we should establish. Third is material solidarity. When people are hurting, James says that how can you say that you care about a poor man if you say be warm and be filled and you don't help him? That's one of the characteristics of these fellowships, is that when people were suffering, when people were poor, when people were poorly clothed and ill-fed, the congregation just naturally, the members of the congregation made up the difference. You read about that in the book of Acts. You read about this whole situation that nobody considered anything they had as though it was their own alone, but it was for common property. Material solidarity is a third characteristic of the kinds of fellowships that Yeshua established, that Paul established, and it was an earmark of the Mediterranean family. Also, family loyalty. You'd be very loyal to your family. The Apostle Paul writes about the fact that when two brothers have something against each other, or they go to law with people in the secular society, he says, can't we solve these things among ourselves? Why must we go to outsiders? Let's keep it in the family. I got a Facebook message in the last 48 hours from somebody, a Yeshua believer I know, who's being sued by another Yeshua believer. The Apostle Paul says this is a disgrace. There should be family loyalty, and there should be relational repair. When things break down between us, we should be able to make up with each other. Yeshua talks about this process in Matthew 18, that if someone has sinned against you, he gives us a whole procedure for trying to reconcile with somebody. Sometimes it's not possible, but it's one of the things that should characterize our fellowships, relational repair. I've seen many times that when people get offended, they just never show up again. That's not the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have the kind of eye-to-eye relationships, the kind of familial relationships, the kind of surrogate families, where everybody knows your name, where everybody knows your pain, and where when things break down, there's a process whereby we're enabled to be reconciled to one another. These are characteristics of the Mediterranean family. These are characteristics of Yeshua's communities as he envisioned them. These were characteristics of the communities that the Apostle Paul established. So the question for us is this: how are we doing? Do we have these characteristics in our congregations? Do we have a context where that can happen? I believe that congregations that are comprised of a network of household fellowships are really where this can happen. Everybody wants to go where everybody knows your name. Everybody wants to go where other people know your pain. And we ought to have face-to-face, eye-to-eye family relationships. What do you think? Let's think again next time here at Interfaithfulness, where we're building bridges, where history builds walls. Shalom.